This is David Murphy, President of Marshfield Medical Center Credit Union and host of the See You at the Top podcast. I'm here to empower the next generation of credit union leaders with insights and confidence. Join industry pioneers as they share their stories and leadership advice to fuel the dreams of future leaders. In today's episode, we hear from Tom Sakash, Strategic Consulting Officer at your credit union partner. Tom has played an integral part representing small credit unions' best interests during his time at CUNA, now America's Credit Unions, and in his current role at your credit union partner. It was through Tom's time at CUNA that we have known each other, and I'm proud of his accomplishments and appreciate his efforts preserving smaller credit unions within the industry. After checking out our conversation, I'd encourage you to check out Tom's podcast, Credit Union Nation, where I recently sat as a guest to talk to Tom about current trends within the credit union space. We'll have a link to that episode in the show notes. Now, without further ado, here is my conversation with Tom Sakash. Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 8 of the See You at the Top podcast. I'm your host, David Murphy, President of Marshfield Medical Center Credit Union. And today I'm joined by a familiar face if you've been in the industry for some time. Tom Sakash, who is the Strategic Consulting Officer at your credit union partner, is joining me today. So Tom, first off, welcome to the podcast. I really appreciate you taking some time out to sit down with me and talk about your journey.
Yeah, thanks very much, David. It's good to be here and excited to talk to you today.
Absolutely. So let's just dive right into it. I know you've had a long history with credit unions, and I've gotten to know you over the years through your work with CUNA/ACU. But in your own words, why don't you tell us your story, how you got into the credit union space, and what got you started, and what got you to your current role today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think something that perhaps people don't know about me as much is that I started my career in journalism. I was a newspaper reporter right out of grad school and worked for newspapers in California. My wife got a job. She's a speech language pathologist. This is the long form. This is the long story. So
Okay,
buckle in here.
perfect.
So my wife is a speech language pathologist, and she had to take a job at a research facility to get her sort of certification. After she graduated from grad school, so she got a job out in California at UC Davis, the Mind Institute, which is in Sacramento. And I was finishing grad school for journalism as well, and started to apply for jobs out in the same area, and got a job at a little newspaper called the Davis Enterprise. And I was covering city government. I really wanted to be a sports reporter. That was kind of my goal, my dream when I was a young lad. And I started off in the sports reporting world, but it was only from a part-time standpoint. There weren't a lot of opportunities. And so I started covering city government and local business for that newspaper. And it was a full-time role. And I really kind of fell in love with sort of the civic engagement. Davis as a city is a very civically engaged community. They really believe in public service and, sort of that civic service side of things, but they also really believed in small business and supporting kind of the local economy by shopping local. A lot of shop local days and events that were happening in Davis back then. And this was 2011 when I was out there. And so did that job for a long time. And my wife and I made the decision to come back to the Midwest. She's from Madison. And actually, one of the city council members at the city of Davis, his name was Lucas Frericks. He's now, I think he's the one of the commissioners for the county. He was telling me about this great organization, if I was looking for a job in Madison, called CUNA, of all places, Credit Union National Association. And he had some contacts over there. He knew one of the board members of CUNA, and said if I was interested in credit unions, it'd be a great place to work. And so I did some research. I actually didn't know a lot about credit unions, and so it was kind of a new world for me. But did some research and realized that they're really amazing organizations. And sort of the cooperative model, which was big in California, especially from a housing standpoint. And of course a sort of food standpoint. But the cooperative model and cooperative finance was really appealing to me. And, the other thing is I got all this exposure to a community that really believed in sort of local support and a local economy, and credit unions really felt, sort of in that vein and in that light. And so it sort of all felt like it was kind of coming together for me for like a career. I kind of was turning my back on journalism just a little bit. Like, as everybody knows, that industry has been through quite a bit. It has evolved a lot, and the opportunities just weren't there, especially in Madison. There weren't too many newspapers here. We have a couple, but nothing where I felt like I could really sort of keep a career going. And so there was a communications position open at CUNA, and I applied for it. And I started in the communications department at CUNA, writing for News Now, which was a daily news enterprise that covered a lot of economic news, credit union features, cool things that credit unions were doing. And so did that for a couple of years. And then I started writing the Nussel Report. So I became the senior executive, or the senior, I forget what the exact title was, but I was basically like, Jim's sort of communications arm,
Yeah.
writing the Nussel Report. I wrote a lot of his speeches. So, something that people probably appreciate. Jim Nussel is a really great public speaker. And so being his speechwriter was pretty challenging, because I would spend a week writing a speech for him for a high profile event, and then he'd get up on stage and use pretty much none of it.
Sounds about right.
But it was always fun. He was always really fun to work with from that standpoint. And then I got the opportunity to work on the Creating Awareness initiative. So everyone probably knows Open Your Eyes, if you're familiar with our effort as an industry to raise the profile of credit unions on the national stage. And I sort of co-led that with a couple of other guys in the communications department. And then I was asked by Mike Shank, who is one of my mentors in the industry, to join him as one of the co-liaisons to the Small Credit Union Committee. And that's where I really fell in love with small credit unions and the work that they do, and how amazing they are as organizations, and not just the organizations, but the people. You know, I I've always I've always felt like the leaders of small credit unions are some of the most special people that I've had the chance to work with. And I got to meet a lot of great people in newspapers, a lot of civic leaders, celebrities. Interviewed my fair share of celebrities. My journalism career took me to a lot of different places, but the leaders of small credit unions are so special because they're brilliant people, right? Like, it's hard to run a credit union. These are complex financial institutions operating in complex regulatory environments. It's very difficult. Your resources are tight, as you know, David. It's a very difficult job, but they're also, so in addition to being able to run a complex business, they also have huge hearts, and want to help everyone that they can. And it's just this very special dynamic. And so being a part of the Small Credit Union Committee, when Mike Shank invited me to do that, it was really a special experience. And like I said, gave me sort of that exposure to the small credit union model. At the time, CUNA was establishing a new department called our engagement department. And they needed someone to serve in the role that would engage with smaller credit unions. And because I'd been doing this work on the Small Credit Union Committee, they asked me to do it. And so I started in that position, and built out a number of programs geared towards small credit unions to help small credit unions. And we really tried to understand, in that role and in that world, we really tried to understand what made a successful small credit union. Like, that was our job one, because I think everyone sort of knew that small credit unions were kind of losing the battle a little bit. There was a lot of negativity. In fact, one of the people who worked for CUNA, I won't name names, told me that they felt like being the small credit union support person was like hospice care.
Oof.
And, I totally disagreed with that. I really didn't think that was true, but that was just the mentality. That was just sort of, how people thought of them. And so, we just really tried to understand and identify where there were successful small credit unions, and we tried to share those models and share those best practices as widely as we could. And, over the time, I was in that role for 7 or 8 years, and I feel like we made a lot of difference in that world. We had a lot of advocacy wins. We had a great relationship with the NCUA, and changed a lot of rules that I think were beneficial to small credit unions. We got more small credit unions engaged. We got them more aware of the programs, of course, that we offered at the National Association, but also we worked to understand who the business partners were, who were really effective and impactful in serving small credit unions, and connected our members, our small credit union members, with those business partners, which I think in turn helped them grow and become more effective as organizations. But like perhaps the thing that was the biggest achievement over my time at the National Association was just like, finding that belief again and helping other credit unions and small credit unions find their belief again in the viability of small credit unions, period. Right. Like I think by finding those examples, like, you think of Terry Robinson at Ironworkers, I think of Jessica Grostic at Copper Basin. I mean, there are many examples. There are hundreds, if not 1,000 examples that I could give of credit unions that are doing extremely well. By highlighting those and kind of demonstrating that it is possible, and that it is, there's definitely a future for small credit unions. I think that really just sort of changed the landscape, and really changed sort of like the mood, and the confidence level of a lot of small credit unions. So that's something I'm really proud of. But then was approached by Scott Butterfield a couple years ago, and he was kind of the original small credit union guy. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
credit unions sort of attributed their success and their ability to like create a vision for a future successful organization. Um, and he asked me to join him and do a lot of the work that they do, strategic planning, of course, CDFI consulting, and it was just a nice fit. It was to me, continuing my work to serve small credit unions, but in an even more impactful way, right? And so I've been doing that for a little more than a year now, and it's been a great experience, and really love what I do. And so that's my really long, it looks like 11-minute answer journey to
Hey, that's
small credit.
okay. There's a lot in that story that I didn't know necessarily. I mean, we've known each other for probably 5 or 6 years, so you probably were relatively new in the position at CUNA when you transitioned to work with small credit unions. But your work has always been appreciated, and now that the reins have been turned over to Rich more. So shout out to both of you for the work that you are doing for our small credit unions, and a shout out to Mike Shank, who just recently retired as well. So hopefully he's off enjoying the next chapter in his life as well. But yeah,
Yeah,
it like the work that to have that advocate, especially within the trade association, whether it was CUNA or now ECU, it was so vital for our small credit unions because there's so many of us that are there, but we do face our challenges and we didn't always feel like that voice was there. So I just want to first off say thank you for all the work that you did do and continue to do. I don't want to make it sound like you're not advocating for us. It's just differently. But yeah, you guys did so much work for us on our behalf, and we really appreciate that.
yes, absolutely. It was a pleasure for sure. And yeah, Mike is staying close. He's retiring or has retired, I should say. But he's definitely staying close to the industry. So I don't think you've seen the last of him yet.
Oh, I figured not for sure. So you talked about your transition from when you were working with Jim closely to when you started to get engaged with the small credit union committee, and then ultimately into that position where you were essentially leading the small credit union initiative for on behalf of CUNA. So it kind of sounds like that job sort of fell in your lap. The opportunity did, but at the same time, it still was a leadership role that I imagine you had to give some consideration to. It wasn't just like, oh, sure, what the heck, and without thinking about the ramifications because of how important it was, not just for CUNA's sake, but also for the small credit unions that were going to be working with you. So during that process, when you were contemplating this role or whatnot, when did you know you wanted to take on some type of a leadership role in your career?
That is such a good question. Okay, so the interesting thing is that in the period when I was making the choice, to become this person who was going to lead our small credit union program, I was also offered another job at CUNA, to run the creating awareness advisory or the creating awareness initiative.
Mm,
Until that moment, I was sort of like, supporting it. But it was being led by the chief communications officer. And I think, he wanted to focus his time on the broader communication strategy for the organization. So they needed someone dedicated. So he offered me that job. And then Molly Bell, who was the then chief engagement officer at CUNA, offered me the job serving small credit unions. And I was literally like, you can have one or the other. You can have either of these choices. And
yeah.
it felt like this very clear crossroads in my career. Like I was going to pick one direction and it was going to take me one place in my career, 20 years down the road, or I take this other choice, behind door number two, here's a completely, different career and trajectory. It was pretty surreal. And there was a lot that went into that decision. Some of which I can share, some of which I probably can't. But the thing that probably drove me to make the choice to serve small credit unions the most was it was the thing that I felt like I was going to be most passionate about. And I think that's so relevant to being a leader and to effective leadership. And like in my time at CUNA, serving the small credit union program, like I interacted with hundreds of small credit union leaders, some of them who were great, some of them who weren't that great. And I really got to see firsthand like what being a great leader meant and what it was. And one of the common denominators was having a passion for the work that they do, right? Like it's not somebody who's just there for the paycheck, not someone there who's going to work 40 hours, clock out at the end of the week and say, okay, I did my job. The credit unions, the small credit unions that were doing well were run by leaders who were incredibly passionate about the work that they did, put in serious hours, really invested big parts of their life into doing that job. And I think, I kind of knew that if I was going to be effective in my work and if I was going to enjoy my work, it would have to be something that I really was passionate about. And, being on the committee and meeting all these leaders of small credit unions, like they just sort of like convinced me that, this was the place where I should invest my time and energy. And it turned out to be true. It turned out to be, truly like a passion, a life's passion of mine, to the point where I'm still doing the job, even though it's a little bit different in a different
Mm-hmm.
role, different organization. I'm still doing it more than 10 years later. Right. And so I think that's really important. I think to be a leader, you really have to believe in what you do. And that's definitely that is what guided me to this, you know, stage in my career now for sure.
Well, I'm sure you would have did well in both roles, but personally and selfishly, I'm glad that you chose the one that you did.
There's always that like, how would it have gone? Would it have been open your eyes?
Yeah.
I will share, I like to share this story because I feel like, you know, it's been long enough where I don't think I'd get in trouble saying this, but when I was working on awareness, I got to fly around the country and sit behind like the double-sided glass to see how consumers reacted to different
Mm.
sort of themes that we were testing for what ended up being Open Your Eyes. And the best one and the most polarizing one was a pigeon named Cuckoo. Like, so this was sort of an avatar that would represent the credit union industry. And you would have some people who responded like extremely negatively to it. They'd be like, how can you associate a brand of yours with the flying rat? And some people said, this one is so much more captivating and much more funny than any of the other ones that we presented. And so there was a chance there, maybe a small chance, that the credit union industry could have been represented by a pigeon. Uh, but it wasn't to be. It wasn't to be. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
But it was
Boy,
fun. It was a great experience.
yeah, I imagine so. The things you learn once you pull
Mhm.
the pull the curtain back, I guess, right?
Right. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Was there a point in time during any point in your career where not only were you ready to take on leadership, or not only were you thinking that you wanted to become a leader, but was there a point where you're like, I'm ready to jump into one of these roles? Or again, was there that little feeling of like, well, I hope I'm ready, or let's just see what we got and see where it goes from there? Like, or was there just like, nope, I know I got this. Let's jump in.
Yeah, that's also a really great question. And I was thinking about this, before our call. And when I started with the small credit union role, and I made that choice, between the two, and I opted for the small credit union program, I never thought of it as I'm going to be this figurehead or I'm going to be this leader of a movement. That was the furthest thing from my mind. It really came down to something that I cared about and that I was passionate about. But ultimately, I kind of figured out, and this is something I think that a lot of credit unions can probably relate to, but for us to be successful at engaging with small credit unions, like we needed them to pay attention. We needed them to realize that we were there for them, that we were this new resource or this growing resource to help them grow as organizations. And what that required was, some real visibility, and some, marketing, I guess you could say. And when I first started on the committee, I was the person who was the chair at the time was Stephanie Sievers, who was then the CEO of Anika Federal Credit Union down in Shreveport, Louisiana. But she's now the CEO of a much larger credit union, I think, in California. And she was like a brilliant marketer. She was a great, business mind, and was a, big student of sort of, business practices. But she was also like a very brilliant marketer. And one of the things that she used to talk about was this t-shirt, that she made all of her staff wear. So what they would do is everyone at the credit union would wear the same t-shirt, and they would volunteer a lot in their community, and it became really visible. And everyone kind of saw the blue Anika t-shirts out and about in the community, and it was like this constant reminder that the credit union was there, involved in the community, and it turned into like this halo effect for the credit union. And she attributes a lot of their growth to kind of that initiative. And so I stole that at the very beginning. You probably remember me wearing this black small CU's t-shirt.
I still got mine.
That Yes, and I spoke at a lot of conferences, a lot of league events, our own conferences. And every time I made an appearance in any public event, any public credit union event, I wore that T-shirt, and I also gave them away, to credit unions, other business or other colleagues at CUNA, and just tried to turn it into sort of a brand. And I think it sort of connected me to the broader sort of small credit union movement in the industry, and I guess turned me into the de facto leader of the small credit union movement. And that was not something I ever asked for. To your question, I wasn't like, I want this job because I'm going to be a leader because of it. But I think all these things, like trying to absorb best practices from other leaders, finding my passion, and just doing the work. They all ended up being effective and kind of turned me into that leader. And then, once I sort of assumed that leadership role, I definitely did so a little, what's the word? Hesitantly, right?
Sure.
I think partly because I was never a practitioner, I think there was this expectation that I put on myself to be an expert in running a small credit union, even though I'd never run a small credit union before. Um, and maybe like that kept me hungry. It kept me learning, about the operations of credit unions, and the things that I knew the really successful ones did in order to be successful. Like I was just constantly looking for ideas and things that I could share with people who I assumed were already really successful, but I constantly wanted to be a value add to them. And I guess it just sort of snowballed. And if that meant, I had to, and if keeping sort of the awareness of our programming meant being more public facing and more visible and sort of being that leader, like I was happy to do it, because that meant we were bringing more credit unions into the fold. And so I don't know, sort of a long way of answering your question, but yeah, it's interesting. It's just an interesting journey, that I've been on here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, the intent that I have behind asking that specific question is to highlight two different things. One is that, I'll give you my perspective real quickly, is that I was being groomed for the CEO position at the credit union, so I knew it was coming. And so had the opportunity to start fairly early, leadership development, personal growth, that kind of stuff. And so even when I got into the position, it was like, okay, I'm ready to go. So I thought. I mean, I got humbled pretty quickly in this whole process, but I thought that I was ready to go with that. And then you've got other people who are like, well, I don't know. I'm surprised you're asking me. I'm not sure that I'm fit for this position. But there's something that either they have that faith that it's going to work out, or they know they have that drive that they will make it work out regardless. And I think that's what we're trying to prove, or trying to show to some of our emerging leaders in the industry, is that even when you have it all figured out, so to speak, you don't. And it's okay to jump into a leadership position when you don't have everything figured out, because that's one of the great things about the credit union space is the collaboration amongst credit unions, the industry in general. And so you don't have to have everything figured out, because there are people who have done it along the way, or who are willing to work with you to help you figure that out. And that's why I ask that question, because I don't want people to. I've talked to a few people, who colleagues, close friends, who I would consider as like, you're ready to take that next step into a C-suite or a CEO role. And you go, well, I just don't have the experience. There's no way that I could do that. And so your stories, and a lot of the other stories that I've been able to listen to over the last year or so, point to, you don't have to. That's okay. You don't have to have it all figured out, because there will be people that will help you along the way.
Mhm. Yeah, and I would say that that's really common among a lot of the successful CEOs that I know. I mean, they didn't want the job to begin with. They sort of fell into it
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, right? Like, so maybe the CEO left unexpectedly, and they were sort of the de facto leader, and they just ended up being the right person. They had sort of the institutional knowledge to sort of keep the credit union moving, but they also had the passion that allowed them to, like, really, sort of dig their teeth in, and do the right things for the betterment of the organization. And yeah, I mean, many examples of leaders who didn't take sort of like the MBA path
Mm-hmm.
or the groomed path, and just ended up in that role, but were just the right person with the right skill set, with the right passion, and are leading some really great credit unions. So yeah, there's definitely there's no tried or true path. I do remember, I don't know if this is necessarily related, but there was this person that reached out to me. He was like a vice president at a mid-sized credit union or so, and he was interested in finding a CEO role at a credit union, and he listed all of these different. He listed his CV, all the different things that he's done. He's been to CUNA management school. He has an MBA. He's been leading a sort of medium-sized department, has a strong finance background, and he's like, "What more do I have to do in order to qualify for a credit union CEO role?" And I'm like, a lot of respects, buddy, you're overqualified.
Yeah. Right.
There are probably 1,000 people that are running credit unions right now that have half of the experience that you do, or half of the sort of professional sort of check boxes checked that you do. And so I think that kind of demonstrates sort of like the disconnect between, maybe how to find one of those roles or what it takes to achieve that level. And where people currently are, I guess, yeah, I don't know. I mean, a lot of it's, I feel like sometimes it's like a little bit of luck too. I think sometimes you're just in
Absolutely.
the right place at the right time. I would consider myself lucky, being, in this small credit union position, just because, CUNA was opening up this department, and needed someone to fill a role, and I just happened to be there, right? Like, did it mean I was the best person for that job? Not necessarily, but I was in a great spot. And so, yeah, I don't know. There's no clear path, usually.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, sometimes timing is more important than anything else that you can do yourself. And I mean,
That's
that's
right.
a interesting perspective from the story you just shared about that vice president who reached out to you, because I think in most industries you would think that the accolades is what's going to continue to propel you forward, and it helps. It's not that that's going to be a hindrance, but yeah, you're right. This industry, the accolades for some organizations, you mentioned Terry Robinson, and I've gotten to know her pretty well over the last couple of years. And, when she jumped into that credit union, I don't know, probably people with accolades wouldn't have been able to do half the job that she did, because she just had the passion and the drive to get them out of the basement, so to speak, and to turn them into a thriving credit union.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to think about her story, as a leader, as one of the most respected leaders in our industry, she was laid off from a job. Hopefully, she's okay with me sharing that. I think she is.
Sorry, Terry, if you
She
didn't
was.
like that.
It wasn't. I don't think it was performance based. I think
No.
I think the organization was going through restructuring. But if she never gets removed from that role, does she ever end up at Ironworkers and do the things that she's done since then? So yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us really want to admit that there is some randomness,
Mm-hmm.
to how we sort of end up in the places that we do. But I do think that, it is often who maybe more so than what you know. And I think that speaks to the importance, for any aspiring leaders to really stay as engaged and connected in the credit union space as much as you can. When we looked at sort of like the formula for successful small credit unions, a huge component of that was being really active in the credit union community overall. I think that's very much the case also for leaders and aspiring leaders, because that just opens up, the possibilities and increases the chances that you're going to find that right fit for you, like many others have. So,
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that I would definitely share that advice as much as I could.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that. I got started in the young professionals group here in Wisconsin. We were fortunate to have a pretty robust group early on when YPs were just taking off, and I attribute most, if not all, my success to the networking, the exposure that I received in that group, and then where it took me, because then I was able to come to different conferences, meet people like Tom and everyone else within the industry, not just other credit unions, not just other young professionals that like to go out and have fun, but just people who you weren't looking at them as, well, let's see what I can get out of this person, but it was just they were just so willing to share their background or tips or whatever the case is, and again, that's just what propels the industry forward.
Yeah, I agree for sure.
So we did have a little bit of a transition here. We recorded this podcast over a couple days, so you're not losing your mind or anything when you see that we're looking a little bit differently than we were the first half of this interview. So again, Tom, you shared some really good insights as to your journey that got you to this point. Some things that even during our relationship together, I didn't really know about your background as well. So it's been really insightful from that perspective. So to continue on with the conversation about your leadership path, when you look back to where you started to where you are currently today, are there key figures that really stand out that you either look to as, say, like a mentor or just someone who extended that olive branch to you that you're like, well, if it wasn't for this, I maybe wouldn't be where I'm at today, and really helped you cultivate that leadership journey for you?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the sort of the CUNA side, or the America's Credit Union side, there are definitely several people who, really empowered me to do more, and to, I guess, raise my visibility at the organization. That sort of set the stage for me to, have more success and, sort of reach these new positions and these new leadership roles. The first person was Douglas Kiker. He was the Chief Communications Officer at CUNA, and I worked with him on the awareness initiative, which I've spoken about. And he just, I think, believed in me, especially as a writer and a communicator, and just, sort of continued to give me additional opportunities to grow in that role. And because of that, I gained greater exposure to the rest of the organization and other members of the leadership team at the organization, which just, allowed me to sort of spread my wings a little bit more. And so, always appreciated his support and his advocacy internally. Certainly, Molly Bell, was always really kind of in awe of her. Molly, I remember, she worked for, I think it was when she was working for Filene. There was this GAC like well, I guess no, it'd be longer than that, 10 years ago, probably 10 or 11 years ago. And she was one of the speakers. She had like 10 minutes to do a presentation on the mainstays of GAC. I didn't know who she was, and she just gave this like amazing talk, that sort of fired up the whole room, fired up 5,000 people. It was pretty amazing. And I'm like, man, this person is cool. Like, how do I work with this person? And then 6 months later, they announced that she took a job with CUNA, which was really awesome. And so I got to work with her a little bit, and then she ultimately brought me over to the engagement side. And just kind of, while we didn't necessarily work like daily together, just seeing sort of her in action, her confidence. She actually shared a lot of insights around strategic planning, because she does a lot of strategic planning with credit unions, or at least did at the time. So learned some things from her, and really appreciated my time with her. And then, of course, Mike Shank. So Mike was the person who brought me into the small credit union committee, kind of taught me about the value and magic, and why small credit unions are special. And so we'll always think of him as like my true mentor, and really appreciate everything that he did to open up my eyes to small credit unions. So that's on the CUNA side, but not on the credit union side. There are so many people, and I think this is just a testament to our industry, who, I learned from and who really taught me, how a successful credit union should be run, and how to be a professional, how to be a leader. Certainly. The first person that comes to mind is Terry Robinson. While Mike was kind of telling me things about small credit unions in a general way. Like Terry would sit me down, or we'd have a phone call for an hour and a half or 2 hours, and she would explain to me, all of the financials and all of the ratios and how lending worked, and how she focused on a niche, with the Iron Workers Credit Union, and like really just kind of put meat on the bone, as far as like what a credit union how a credit union operated, and what a successful credit union looked like. So really appreciate her guidance. Lori Herrick too. Lori is someone who, I would consider to be, my best friend in credit unions. And, a best friend is somebody who you can call with any problem or any challenge. Lori's probably tired of my phone calls and text messages. Because anytime I had a question about anything, I would call her up and say, "What does this mean?" Or "How do you feel about this?" Or, if we made this change, how would that impact you as a credit union? And she just became a great resource to me. And the list goes on with the credit union folks. But like I think, for all the credit unions that I worked with, back at America's Credit Unions, like I think the common denominator among them is just like they're willing to share their time with you. They're willing to teach. They're willing to answer any question that you have. I mean, I think that's a mark of a true leader, someone who's selfless with their time. And I think that's even more pronounced at small credit unions because they don't have much of it. And so for a leader of a small credit union that's stretched super thin and is juggling a million things, for them to, still make the time for you, and to help you, and, make sure you understand things, like it was just really amazing. And like that, as far as leadership is concerned, like, that was the greatest leadership trait that I think I ever learned, was just being super selfless and, helping people, whether it's beneficial to them or not. I think that's really amazing. So I think that's it. It's always tough because you don't want to leave anybody out.
Understood.
But that's who come to mind at the moment.
Well, we use the mantra, people helping people, obviously in the industry, and it obviously rings true, but we sometimes forget that it also means colleagues. It's not necessarily the credit union working with our members, but it's also credit unions helping each other, or like in your position. And I think this emphasizes the importance of networking, honestly, because I get it. Your role, especially when you were leading the small credit union initiative, you really didn't have any other option than to network with small credit unions. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been successful in your job. But for a lot of us who work at credit unions, if we look at it and we say, "Well, I don't have the time to, go to a conference, or I don't have the time to do this or that or whatnot," which is true because a lot of us we don't have that time to be able to do that. But at the same time, if you're not taking advantage of those opportunities to meet someone, then you don't have the opportunity to have these conversations or to learn from other people or to be able to share your wisdom and insight with other people too. And I think that it's so unique that the credit union space has the collaborative nature that we do. And so if we're not taking advantage of that, we're really dropping the ball on something that really can differentiate and aid us as an industry going forward.
Yeah, 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 without a doubt. I mean, I think, as we look at successful credit unions, those who are really engaged in the credit union community are definitely doing well. They're definitely doing better because they have access to all the ideas. If you just have a few employees at your credit union, you have fewer people to brainstorm with and to be creative with. I feel like I share this quite a bit, but like if you walk into a room with 100 other CEOs of credit unions, think about the world that you're now exposed to and all the potential ideas that you're exposed to. So there's definitely power in numbers, and would encourage any aspiring leader or current leader, to really make sure that you're engaging with the broader credit union community because it can be a huge, huge differentiator. Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Mhm.
When you look back now at your journey to where you're currently at with your credit union partner, is there one piece of advice that you received that really sticks out to you that either changed the trajectory of your career or was something where it just it just changed something within you as an employee, but then also as a potential leader?
Man, that's a good question. Um, I don't know if I can point to something specific that someone said to me, but I think something that I've figured out along the way, at least, and maybe this is something that someone has shared, is the importance of being passionate about what you do. Like when we work with credit unions on strategic planning sessions, like we really try to make sure that the board members in the room, the leaders in the room, understand what they actually care about and what they're passionate about. Because the more passionate about something that you are, the harder you're going to work at it, the more engaged that you're going to be at it. That's why we encourage, credit unions to socialize their missions and their visions with their entire staff, because that creates buy-in and engagement, and it allows a staff person or employee to align their personal values with the overall mission of the organization. And so, I think, the greater point here is that if you're passionate about something, if you really care about something, you're going to really work hard at it. And so, I feel fortunate that, I really believe in credit unions. This is an industry that I care about deeply. There are things about the credit union industry that just really align with who I am personally. And so it's like a real joy that I get to do this work. And I think because of that, it makes me more effective at what I do. It makes me a better professional because I take it very seriously. Like I'm not mailing it in, like every day that I do this job, I try to do it the best that I possibly can because I know that if I do a good job, it's going to make an impact. And when you think about the leaders of credit unions, it's the same thing. Like those that are really bought in, those that are really committed and are putting the work in and the time in, like leaders like Terry and Lori, who I just mentioned, they're going to run better credit unions, because they're in it and they're invested, and they're really putting in the time. So, I think that's kind of one of the biggest lessons, just as a professional, like finding something that you really care about and that you're really passionate about is important because it'll bring you more joy and more fulfillment on like a daily basis. But it'll also make you more effective in whatever line of work that you do. And that should open up more doors. That should, if advancement in your field is important to you, like I think that allows you to flourish, and be noticed and be seen a little bit more. So, definitely find those things that you're really passionate about because I think that's the way to success and however you define success, without a doubt.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really good life lesson, not just a credit union professional lesson right there. Because life's
Hmm.
hard enough as it is, and if you aren't doing something that you enjoy or find joy in doing, it makes it that much more difficult. Even if you are effective in that position or that leadership position or whatever you're aiming to do, it just makes it that much harder to be successful ultimately.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd like to think that I'd put my best foot forward on no matter what the job was. Like, even if I didn't end up in a place where I was super passionate, like, I don't know. I feel like I'm hopefully the type of person that would give my best because, why, what are you there for if you're not, trying? But it definitely helps. Like everybody has their ups and downs. Everybody has their days and their weeks where they're feeling great and the pedal is to the metal, and then there are those times when you're in a lull and maybe things aren't connecting, and so those times in the lull, if you're still doing something that you're passionate about, it kind of helps you through those days. It gives you something to latch onto. So it's a good life hack, I guess you could say.
Yeah, yeah, no, well put, well put. Well, that's a good segue to we've talked about a lot of the positives that have occurred during your journey here, but we all know that as in life, as you just mentioned, life has its ups and its downs. So when you look back now on your past, is there a specific challenge that really stands out to you? That's something that you had to overcome, or there was just a situation in which you didn't have all the answers right away, but you figured it out. But some challenges that you did face in some capacity during your career so far.
Yeah, yeah. Many, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, the first is I think one that I'm still dealing with, and that is, I would say the overall viability and sustainability of small credit unions. I entered this role, really having high aspirations for, creating some sort of environment that would allow small credit unions to, grow and be sustainable for a long, long period of time. And I had some ideas on how to do that, but like really like the bigger picture was, how do we save small credit unions? Like that was my North Star. And maybe that was unrealistic. Maybe it was a naive mission or vision for myself, but that's where I started, right? And so, excuse me. And so, I think I definitely had some more like moments of like being more realistic and kind of being bummed out by that. I was like, okay, well, we can't do it. We can't save every small credit union. Great examples would be when I'd be working with a credit union for a long period of time, and then I would see on the NCUA's merger report that, that their credit union was listed. Or I'd
Sure.
get an email, I'll always remember this email that I got from a credit union in Iowa, and they were a great run credit union. Their financials were great. They were growing in members, growing in loans. They were profitable. Everything that you'd want to see in a sustainable organization. And they'd found a niche. They were starting to serve the Hispanic community, and by all measures, were doing well and seemed like they had a sustainable and relevant future. And I get this long email from the CEO saying, I'm just tired and I can't do it anymore. And, the board is checked out. And, I think our only path at this point, I can't find a successor. Our only path is to merge. And I remember forwarding that directly to the entire leadership team at CUNA and being like, you know, there's nothing we could have done. I don't think there's anything that the trade association should be held accountable for in this situation. My point is just that it's hard out there. It's hard to lead a credit union. It's hard to lead a small credit union, and this is just the reality. And just wanted to remind everybody of that fact. And so things like that were certainly discouraging. I had some, more professional disappointments, I guess you could say. At CUNA, there were some projects, and this is something I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, but there were some projects and some bigger initiatives that I proposed that never got backed and never got funded, that I thought could be transformational. One of the things that I always wanted to do that I thought could have been a real game changer for smaller credit unions was creating like a network of buyers groups. So like a group of credit unions could collectively negotiate a core or some piece of technology or some operation or third party service that they needed. And it's something that I wanted to sort of oversee and was told that it's not something that the trade association would typically spearhead. And it did migrate over to CSS, which was great. And I think Barb Lohman, she made some progress towards some of those things. And so I was happy from that standpoint. And so like maybe this is a little selfish, but like this was one, when I started in the role, I like started with a blank piece of paper and I'm like, what are the things that we can do to save small credit unions? And at the top of that list was this concept, right? Like if you have resource challenges, but you also have a need to go to get more technology or to just evolve your organization, through the help of third party, um, how do you do it? Like how do you make these things accessible to credit unions that don't have a lot of resources or financial capacity? You create scale by, grouping them together. So like that was one of my initial sort of grand schemes. And when I was told that like I wouldn't be doing it personally, I was just bummed out, I was just disappointed. But that's the way it goes. And I understand the reasoning, I mean, I know the trade association didn't want to have play favorites, or just get involved in these complicated contracts and all that. So, no bad blood, no hard feelings. But I think that was a tough pill to swallow, I guess. And so I forget if there was like a second part to the question.
No,
Like
it was just in
how
general.
did I overcome it?
Yeah, you can definitely go into that. It's really just high level, like just talk about some of the challenges that you face. So yes, if you would like to, if you have an example where you faced one and this is the strategy you deployed, and yes, it worked out, no, it didn't. If you have an example, feel free to share that.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. I don't know. That's like the biggest one that comes to mind.
Okay.
I mean, I think that it ultimately led to, some positive things, I mean, as I mentioned, CSS kind of took over the concept, and had some meaningful conversations, and I think, and I think it's actually still work that's being done, and I think, as far as like, leadership is concerned, and a leader is concerned, like I do think that, you know, just acknowledging that things aren't going to go exactly how you planned, but and being ready to pivot, to new things is important. Like, so maybe that didn't work out, but like we still were doing a lot of work in advocacy that like really did make an impact and a difference. And so like I don't know, I just worked on focusing on the things I could control, and I
Yeah.
think that helped us like remain effective. Maybe not in the ways that I had originally planned, envisioned out, but still in a meaningful way. And so that's a victory for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that your ability to, because we're all going to face challenges, difficulties, setbacks, disappointments, and I think your ability to accept them, as difficult as they may be, but your ability to accept them and then try to see the bright or see the light in any situation, I think is really commendable. Because it is easy to, especially as a leader within any organization. But it seems like because of some of the challenges you've already cited with smaller credit unions specifically, it just seems that anytime you get faced with a setback like that, it's easy to wallow in that and just say, oh man. And then you get to that point, like you referenced that Iowa credit union, where it's like, okay, we've faced enough of these, I just can't do it anymore. And ultimately, it that hurts the industry. It obviously changes that credit union because now they've merged away, I imagine. But ultimately, it affects their members because their members were working with them for a reason. I mean, that's always my message with these smaller credit unions is at this point in time, anyone could work with any large institution they wanted to. So the fact that they've chosen to work with you means that there's something there that they appreciate, whether it's the product, maybe it's that dedicated service, whatever. And so to eliminate that because you just think, well, there's no point in us being around anymore, is really disheartening at the end of the day. But so sometimes you
Mhm.
do have to take these challenges with a grain of salt and say, yeah, I'm just not gonna. I'm gonna accept it and process it, but then I'm gonna try to move on and continue the fight.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you gotta have some thick skin out there, right?
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things that have happened like over the course of my life that like I feel like have prepared me for failure. Like I mean, I don't know. It's not like I've lived the hardest life in the world, but like professionally, personally, like I've definitely had things happen that I can certainly point to and say that this made me stronger, more adaptable, more ready for setback. And so, those things are really important. I mean, you got to experience those failures. You got to experience those setbacks in order to become a stronger and more confident professional. So, it's just part of it. It's part of the game. It really
Yeah,
is.
let's stay there for a second, and not to get specific on anyone's particular situation you face, but just in general, when you are facing some of these challenging situations or these challenging feelings that you're processing, where do you look to or where do you turn to for inspiration or help? I know you mentioned earlier that you would talk to Lori, you know, for anything credit union related, but maybe just more specifically to some of these challenging times. Is there somewhere that you would turn, whether it is a mentor or something of a personal value or family or anything like that? Like what did you lean on when you really needed that little extra help?
Well, definitely my wife, for sure. So my wife Ashley, like she's my she's definitely my closest confidant, and probably bore the brunt of a lot of complaining and shit talking, over the years. And so she definitely always she has like a really unique ability to like set me straight on things, and to kind of like talk me off the ledge. Uh, and so I've always appreciated her, ability to, I don't know, talk sense into me. I think that's what it is. I think like she and I are not the same in a lot of ways, but like we do complement each other really well. And so I think for that, like, when these situations come up, like she provides a perspective that's different than mine most of the time. And that allows me to see it, in a little bit more, 3D way. And so that's really helpful. That's definitely really helpful. I talk to my kids. My kids are young, right? Like my daughter Camden is 6, and my daughter Ruby is 4. And I do tell them things. When if anything's going on at work, or I'm having any issues, like I'll share it with them, at a high level, and just say, yeah, I'm having this issue, or here's what I'm working on, and what do you think? And they'll provide their little thoughts when they can. But like sometimes it's just like nice to have, just to have people to sort of have as that sounding board. The other thing that's more recent, is ChatGPT.
Yeah.
I don't have like a relationship with ChatGPT necessarily, but like I think there's this phenomenon, and I've heard this from other people, is that like if you're stuck on something, whether you're like writing something or you're just trying to figure out a problem, like it's becoming easier and easier to rely on like AI and ChatGPT. I use a lot of Grok lately. I don't know if you've used Grok.
I haven't.
Um, but like you open up the window, and then there's like the little text box where you can type in your prompt or your question, and even just doing that, and like writing it out, like kind of like provides clarity, for different problems or challenges that you have. Like I
Yeah.
used to do that with just Word documents. Like if I was like struggling with something, like I would try to lay it all out on a piece of paper so that I could like really sort of visualize what's happening. And so that this is sort of taking the place of that, where I start asking a question like, okay, you know, let's say I'm working with a credit union and they want to expand their field of membership. What are the opportunities that they have in their market? And then the way to really effectively, use one of these chat models is to provide like the right parameters, and to provide the right framing, and context. And so like that requires you to add more detail. And so as you're writing this thing, you're adding more detail, and just like that process starts to clarify things even more. And so like as you're writing this prompt, your mind is starting to work out the problem in a way, and starting to unpack it. And so sometimes I never even hit enter. I never even ask the uh, the model for anything. It's just like this
Hmm.
process for clarifying things. And so just kind of a recent, phenomenon that's happening in my sort of problem solving process. But like overall, to back to your question, it's just people, like it's just having
Yeah.
people who, you can be honest with and transparent with. Like I think that's just so valuable to like really have an ability to speak your mind about things. Like I think when you work for an organization, there's always going to be that thought in the back of your mind of like, okay, who will this person tell, this secret or this feeling that I have? Or if
Yeah.
like you're writing in a Teams message, like, man, I can't believe this person's doing this, or what are they doing? And who's looking at those messages, that kind of thing. Like it can be a little stilting,
Sure. Yeah.
and so. having people outside of your organization, in particular that, you can call up on your cell phone, your personal cell phone, or text with your personal cell phone and just say, this is what I'm dealing with. I need your help. I need your advice. Or I just need you to listen. Like that is
Yeah.
so, so valuable for sure. And like, my wife is great. My kids are great. They don't understand credit unions, necessarily. And so like I have that, sort of in my personal life. But I think professionally it's good to have people that are sort of like in the industry,
Mhm.
kind of understand what you're talking about too. But yeah, I think it's definitely people you can trust. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you there. It's interesting you bring up the use of ChatGPT and some of these other AI and LLMs, just because I do the same thing actually, because it's so I actually, when I was going to high school, or when I was in high school, I should say, one of my thoughts was actually to go into psychology when I went to college, and I shied away from that. But I've always had like that. That would probably be my hidden passion, I guess, if you will. So it's interesting because of the idea of like externalizing your thoughts, and because it's like chaos in your mind, and you feel like, okay, internally I can organize this, but you just can't do it, and then you spit it out in ChatGPT or whatever, or a Word doc like you mentioned, and it just kind of starts to organize things a little better. But I will do that occasionally as well, where there's something I'm faced with a situation, or I just don't understand what the heck's even going on, and it's amazing. I mean, you always still take that, you still have a little bit of skepticism, but it's interesting because we're so quick to, with like an LLM, to be like, well, I know that that's technology, so I have to be skeptical of it. But I can walk up to someone I know fairly well or vaguely well, and I'll trust them wholeheartedly. And it's like, well, I don't know that they're telling me the truth either. So it's just an interesting concept, but I think that that's one of the use cases for like an LLM that I think is going to continue to take off, is just that idea of being able to bounce ideas off of someone without burdening someone. Because I know that's one of my challenges is I hate to reach out to people because I know, oh gosh, that person's busier than I am or whatever, and I hate to burden them with my problem. That's not fair, but people are willing to have these conversations, so it's not they don't look at it that way, but I just know myself, I look at it that way. So it's like if I can figure it out on my own first, which isn't always the best, because it is good, like you're saying, to have that circle of people that you can just spill your beans to essentially, and know that there's not going to be judgment that's coming back. They're just going to help listen to you and process that. But that it's interesting that you bring that up.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really enjoying like the expansion of this technology. And I definitely do it carefully,
Hmm.
like I think we still need to, like I don't think that the data is perfect yet, right? Like
Hmm.
I think they're getting closer, like I think if you could trust a response 60% a year ago, I think you can trust it about 90%. I think that's what I heard at this
Okay.
point, or maybe even higher than that. So like we're very quickly moving towards, almost total reliability. And nothing's ever totally reliable, I guess.
Right.
And so, any work that I do with those programs, I definitely am verifying for sure.
Definitely.
But like, yeah, I mean, some of those other kind of like personal growth exercises that you can do with them are pretty cool. So it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree. I'd recommend checking it out if you've never done that before, because it'll be eye-opening, to say the least.
Yes. Oh God, yes, for sure.
So you talked a little bit before about your transition from journalism into the credit union space. So we don't need to rehash that necessarily, but as you reflect back, and you've touched on it here and there, so if you've already answered this fully, then that's fair. But what really has kept you in this space? You transitioned to your credit union partner about a year ago, and you know I know you have the passion for credit unions, and so that might be your answer, but is there something specific that you point to, whether it is hope or it is something else there that continues to keep you in the industry, as opposed to saying, okay, well, I've kind of tackled what I wanted to here. Let's get back into journalism, or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, the main thing, aside from just like the people, and the mission, and just believing in credit unions as sort of like the business model that we should be holding up, in financial services and other industries. It's kind of a project, right? Like this work of helping individual credit unions or, the category of small credit unions is like a big, maybe never-ending project. And that really speaks to me from like a personal motivation standpoint. Like I love projects. Like I love building things in particular. Like in my spare time, like I'm a little bit of a hobbyist woodworker. I'll build
Mm.
like planter boxes and furniture, like stools and stuff, not like nice, dining room tables. I'm nowhere near good enough to do that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Um, but I'm really drawn towards big, sort of projects and, trying to bring things to fruition like that. And I think that's what, this work kind of is in a way. It's like creating an environment or creating some sort of framework to help small credit unions be successful, or working on an individual credit union, helping them create a business plan that'll help them be, successful into the future. And so I really am drawn to like the project-based sort of type of work. And so like, yes, I love credit unions and, I love the people that I work with. I love working with the credit union people. I love working with Scott and Allison at your credit union partner. But like, it's also this outlet for building something that I'm really drawn to. And I think that's another big reason why I think I'm still doing this work for sure. Yeah.
I'm gonna follow up with a curveball that I didn't plant the seed before this recording, but have you or do you think that at some point in your future you will actually work at a credit union?
Ooh, gosh, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I know a lot of CEOs of credit
Hmm.
unions, as you know, and it's not an easy job.
It's not.
And it can be very taxing. And I'm not saying that I don't work hard now. I mean, I put in the hours for sure,
Yeah.
but there is a level of responsibility, and a level of pressure, that I think leading a credit union takes, that a little scare me a little bit, especially with my, like having a 6-year-old at home and a 4-year-old at home. Like I really do want to keep my focus on them as much as I can while they're young.
Yeah.
And I know that if I jumped over to the credit union side, I would be pretty obsessed. I mean, we were just talking about like my love of projects. Like if I
Hmm.
really got to build a credit union out, whether it's from the leadership role or, even just, a lower level role. Like I think I would really, really dive in head first and maybe lose myself a little bit.
Sure.
Um, and so I'd be a little bit worried about that. And that's kind of the thing that's always sort of kept me from making the jump, I guess I would say. That isn't to say that I wouldn't consider it down the road or if the right offer came through.
Yeah.
But like right now, I'm so happy where I am that and I have the flexibility to like I work from home, so like when Camden comes home from the bus, like I can be here and say hi to her, before getting back to work.
Yeah.
And so like that kind of stuff is pretty priceless at the moment, but they'll get older, they'll
Yeah.
start not wanting to hang out with me as much as they do now.
Yeah. That's fair.
And yeah, and they'll get cars and start driving themselves places, and that will definitely give me a little bit more time. So maybe down the road, yeah,
Okay.
never
And
say never.
Scott, if you're listening to this is not my way of trying to poach him from you. I just interested in the question because obviously you've partnered with and consoled several credit unions like you've talked about. So it's just interesting, if that's something where like someday, or if it's like, nope, I really enjoy the consulting side of things more and helping multiple credit unions. And so more just from that angle.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the cool thing about this company and also America's credit unions is the national reach. Something I've always loved is like being able to work with credit unions from coast to coast and just kind of like experiencing different parts of the country. Like my last planning session was in Montana, and it took me to a place that I had never been to before.
Hmm.
And it sort of like got to experience a way of life that's a lot different than mine. And like getting into the minds of the people who run that organization is very different than other credit unions and other communities that I'm familiar with. And so like that is really cool. Like being tied down to one credit union. I mean, if it was in Madison or like the community I lived in, it would be kind of cool because then you get to like build out something that has an impact on your own community, and I'm certainly drawn to that for sure. But you do get this sort of like diversity and perspective and experience when you get to work with credit unions more across the country.
Yep.
And so, I think that kind of I'm pretty drawn to that side of things as well. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, so
Mhm.
what I'm hearing here is about 10 to 15 years I need to entertain a Madison area branch and then we can bring you on board. So
There you go. There you go. Yes.
as we put a bow on this conversation, and I really appreciate everything you've shared up to this point, the goal with this podcast is to reach out to emerging leaders, to instill in them the faith and the belief that they can to step into some of these leadership roles, whether it's mid-management, senior management, CEO spot, whatever it might be. So, to reach out to these individuals from your perspective, is there one piece of advice that you would share with someone who is just starting on their, not necessarily their credit union journey, but just on their journey to get into one of these leadership roles?
I mean, it kind of goes back to what I said a while ago about finding your passion, you know, and it also kind of relates to our discussion on setbacks. Like, I think if you have this like really specific vision in mind for how your career is going to go, you are going to set yourself up for disappointment a little bit because the fact is things don't ever go exactly how you plan them
Hmm.
and how you envision them, unless you're like I don't know, Derek Jeter or, Michael Jordan, I guess. You don't
Well,
want
even
that.
like in Jordan's case, he faced some setbacks in his career. I mean, the story is obviously infamous, so we don't need to repeat it. But even those types of stars, right?
Totally, without a doubt, without a doubt, right. And yeah, I mean that's a great point. And so, I think it's just having like a flexibility in your dream. That like you might have this idea that you want to be a CEO one day, or you want to be in this specific leadership role one day. It may never come. It may never come at the time. It might not come at the time that you expect it to. Um, and so just be prepared to be flexible. But then, the other thing is going back to what I said previously, it's like make sure you're doing something that you really care about and that you're passionate about. You'll leave your everyday more fulfilled, and you'll be more effective at your work. And, I mean, I think the people who are great leaders are really strong operators, and effective employees, and effective at what they do. Like like Terry Robinson, she was in operations for a long time. She's a CEO now.
Hmm.
She was in operations, she was a lender, and she really excelled in those roles, and was really good at what she did, which I think sort of allowed her to become an even more successful leader. And so, I do think, not skipping, some of the tactical work, some of the, you got to get your elbows dirty. Was that right? You got to get your hands dirty. I
Yeah.
don't know. You know what I'm saying. You got to put in the hours and put in the work.
Yeah.
And I think that the more effective you become as an employee, I think that just sets you up for success as a leader down the road, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
all those are great pieces of advice. I really love what you said about the flexibility because I think you've talked to some people and they've got everything mapped out down to the month they're gonna do it and this and that and I think like you said, you set yourself up for failure, not in the sense of maybe you will achieve that just at a later date or your path is a little bit different, but I think when you expect one thing and it doesn't play out that way, it's easy to allow disappointment to come in. And instead of saying, okay, well, I actually got this better opportunity, or maybe I found a different passion doing, I don't know, let's say, Oh, I wanted to be a CEO. I got an opportunity to be a CFO. I'm really disappointed in that. And then I come to find out like that's actually where I'm better suited for the organization. But if you're sitting there disappointed because, well, I said I was going to be CEO and I never got that opportunity, you're going to miss the opportunity that ultimately was laid before you. So I really love that piece of advice.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great. And I think I said the story the other day. Like there was somebody that reached out to me and said that I have all of this experience. I've got this, on my
Yep.
resume. This is where I went to school, etc. Like, how do I? Am I? What else do I need to do to become a
Hmm.
CEO of a credit union? And I think that person is probably just a product of not being in the right place in the right time yet, because I think there would be so
Yep.
many other organizations that would scoop them up if they knew that this person was interested. And so, that's the other thing. And it goes back to what you were saying before about staying connected. Grow your network, because that will grow your opportunities. That'll grow the chances that you
Yeah.
have to reach whatever dream it is that you have. So that's good advice too, David.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, well, this is where we're actually going to transition here a little bit. So I appreciate you going through the list of questions that I had for you, but we're going to turn the tables a little bit here, and I'm going to turn it back over to you, Tom, and we're gonna continue this recording with a little bit back and forth the other way now.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, I guess I can officially welcome you to the Credit Union Nation podcast. So I'm really pleased to have David Murphy, president of Marshfield Medical Federal Credit Union, on the podcast here. And, if you've been listening, we did a first half of this podcast on David's podcast, and I'm going to have him talk about the podcast a little bit here before I pepper him with some questions. But
Mm.
if you haven't listened to the first half yet, it's all me talking. It's David asking me questions about leadership qualities, and just my experience in the credit union industry. It was a great, fun conversation. So listen to that half first, and I'll share a link in the show notes here, so you can find the first half of that, and then come back and watch the second half, which is where I get to ask David all these great questions. And I just have three kind of main lines of questioning here, so I'll keep it pretty chill for you, David. Um,
Okay,
but f-
good. Whew.
but first, I just want to hear a little bit about you, your credit union journey, and also about the credit union. Tell us how things are going at Marshfield Medical. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, Tom. I appreciate that. So I actually got started in credit unions relatively young. So my background actually goes to the when I was at the age of 3, and so my mom did daycare. I lived out in the country outside of a small town, and so she had a couple families that she did daycare for. One of those families happened to be I think when she started, she was not the CEO, but due to some unforeseen circumstances, she actually took over as CEO of the credit union relatively young. And so when she started having a family, my mom started working with her. And so fast forward about 13 years or so, and I was just finishing up my sophomore year in high school, was just about ready to get my driver's license, decided that I wanted to start working. So I stopped in by her at the credit union and said, "You don't got any work for me or anything, do you, by chance?" And she said, "Well, I suppose we can make something work." So I started part-time with her for about a month and decided that I really enjoyed it. Was just I shouldn't say just because these positions are important too, but it started as an MSR at the credit union at part-time and really enjoyed what I was doing, work with the members and whatnot. And so worked full-time over the summer and actually worked there during high school. Just that came in for a couple hours every day. And so that was at the age of 16 when I started there and went to high school, went to college, and still came back, worked summers, worked a couple random weekends here and there, and just kept my finger on the pulse of the credit union specifically. There was one year when I was going off to college where I decided, nope, so I went to college in Eau Claire, which was about an hour and a half from where I grew up. And so I wanted to spend one college summer up there with all my friends and do all the fun college stuff that you get to do while you're there. And so there was one year where I didn't actually work at the credit union. But besides that one year, throughout school, after I graduated college, I actually went back and worked there for a couple months. And then I moved to another credit union In the lacrosse area, I worked at Ultra Federal Credit Union, which at the time was just approaching $1 billion. Now they're much larger than that. But so the credit union I first worked at was Oakdale Credit Union. They were a smaller credit union. So I got to see both sides of the credit union space, unbeknownst to me, because at the time it was just a job. Let's just face it, it wasn't anything that I was looking to stick with. And
Mm-hmm.
then I was about a year out of college. And so I went to school for accounting. My goal was to get my CPA, go work at a CPA firm. So the credit union space obviously got me the paychecks that I needed to fund my college, but it wasn't something that I was looking to stay with, honestly. So I got an opportunity to move up here to Marshfield about a year after I graduated. And so my predecessor, who knew my first boss, and I had a conversation during our interview, and she said, "Listen, I'm just looking for someone to come in, do a little bit of internal audit for us. It's a 6 month gig." And I said, "That's perfect. I'm just looking for a 6 month gig because I'm going to get my CPA. I'm going to move on to bigger and better things." And so it was a great transition to move into the area. Well, fast forward, I think it was probably 4 years, and I was still working on my CPA, so it took a little bit longer than I thought that it was going to take. And so eventually I did get my CPA, and so then my predecessor was a little stressed because she knew that my ultimate goal wasn't to leave the credit union and move on. Well, what I was able to demonstrate over those couple of years that I was there was that not only was I passionate and willing to do what needed to be done for the job, but that I had some perspective or potential, maybe I should say, to ultimately be some type of a leader within the organization. So Marshfield Medical Center is right now we're about 90 million. We're a single branch that serves healthcare here in the state of Wisconsin. At the time that we had this conversation, it was 2014. We were 55 million. So we were definitely smaller. But she came to me and sat me down and basically said, "Listen, I've got 5 years, maybe 10 years left at most. And then we're going to be looking for someone who I'm looking for a successor." And she said, "I think that you have the potential to do that." And so, as a 20-something-year-old who doesn't understand anything about anything, you're like, okay, well, sure, I could be the boss someday. That sounds great. So through that next couple of years, she devoted a lot of resources to allow me to attend events like GAC. I remember going out there for the first time, which was completely overwhelming, but just got my exposure to the industry and the different events that the industry brings forth. Was able to build out a huge network through the Wisconsin's been pretty fortunate to have a really strong young professionals program since probably one of the earliest ones, I would say, within the country. And so I was able to grow my network of people that I knew, which then, of course, expanded out beyond just my young professional colleagues, but then also to other credit union leaders and whatnot. So that by the time then, you know, unfortunately, I bring up COVID because COVID hit, and that obviously changed things a little bit. But during then those first, it was after the first year that COVID really shut things down, is when my predecessor then stepped down and retired, and so then I took over in May of 2021, and so it's 5 months, or I'm sorry, 4 years. I don't know why I said 5 months. 4 years since I took over that position, and it's been a whirlwind of a journey. I mean, it's been lots of good things, lots of challenges, just with the circumstances being what they were. Um, there's definitely a lot of challenges that smaller credit unions are facing right now, but we seem to be in a good space, I believe. Albeit with still some ongoing challenges, but really just trying to recenter what our purpose is as a financial institution, making sure that we're doing everything that we can to be able to serve everyone that needs a credit union partner at the end of the day is really what our goal is. And so it's a little different. We've had some what I would say unique challenges being a healthcare based credit union, just in the sense that COVID hits in March of 2020, and for a lot of credit unions and the people that they're serving, it's listen, I don't have a job, or I'm getting furloughed, or I'm getting laid off, or whatever, and we face that for about 4 to 6 weeks. But as everyone will know, during that time frame, healthcare workers was one of the few, I'm not saying the only, but one of the few industries where it's like we need you more now than we need you ever, right? And so we actually faced the opposite, where we had people who were working more, and then they didn't need the financial assistance necessarily that a lot of others did. But what they did need was a break, because by the end of that first year, when people were getting work 60, 70 hours and there was nothing else to be able to go home to and relax and, vacation or whatever that you would use to blow off steam. There was some challenges of, okay, well, how do we help people outside of the financial space? And I would say we did an okay job with that at the end of the day, but it definitely has been challenging. We've seen a lot of turnover within the space, a lot of changes within the structure of how healthcare is currently operating. But ultimately, we still stuck true to what our mission is to figure out a way to be able to help our members in whatever capacity they needed. So we've kept that mission at the heart of our operations, and we will continue to keep that at the heart of what we're doing going forward. But overall, we're taking baby steps forward, which I think is a positive thing. We've got some things in the hopper, so to speak, that I feel like are really gonna be game changers for us in the next 12 to 24 months, let's say, from a strategic standpoint. And so I'm optimistic as a small credit union that's, there's not a lot of us anymore that are either industry based or seg based. A lot of us have gone community chartered, and that's okay. But as an industry based institution, I'm optimistic because we have industry that is not going to go away. Healthcare is one of those things where, it's going to change. Like obviously the use of robotics when it comes to surgeries and whatnot is already taking place. And I know that there's a lot of debate in the healthcare space as far as like their use of AI and what that's going to look like. But at the end of the day, I don't see a situation in which you're going to go up to a hospital and it's going to be all robots and AI doing your surgeries and your check-ins. You're always going to need people, I think, on the back end somewhere that's going to be driving the healthcare space forward. So from our perspective, we look at that as, this industry is not going to go away like unfortunately some of the other industries throughout our country have experienced, the loss of. And so we're optimistic about what the future looks like for us from a small credit union, but also from a industry-based credit union ultimately.
Yeah, so at your credit union partner, we are always talking about growth. We believe growth is really important to the health of an organization and specifically a credit union. You mentioned that when you first were starting the sort of your leadership journey, the credit union was 50, 55 million in assets, and now you're up to 90, almost 90 million in assets.
Yep.
I would guess maybe some of that growth took place during the pandemic, and the influx of money that came in. But what are the other reasons that the credit union has grown, and where have you had success in growing the credit union over the past couple of years?
Yeah, you are correct in that. So from 2010 when I started, I remember the first month that I put together our financials, we were about 49 million. So February of 2020, putting together the financials, I believe we were like 68 million. So we did have some growth over that first 10 years that we were in existence. The COVID years, like a lot of institutions, we definitely saw an influx of deposits. Again, where for some institutions, especially I imagine like your CDFIs, your low income designated, those members, when they got those stimulus payments, they were like, I need that to be able to put food on my table. So they were using that money more rapidly. Again, for our members, a lot of them were, okay, well, I'm actually working more than I was pre-COVID, and then I'm getting these payments on top of it. So we saw an influx of those deposits, and they've started to go out the door here and there, but for the most part, they didn't really need them, honestly. And so it was a little bit of a unique challenge because we had to figure out what to do with that cash at a time when, you know, if you've got a lot of cash, typically you aren't doing a lot of borrowing or whatnot. And so there was some unique challenges there. I will say that while our assets have grown, and it's a testament to the people that we are working with, one of the challenges that we are facing, and I'm hoping that we can start to turn around here over the next year or 2 years, is we have seen a small, but a steady decline in membership over the years. Part of that due to over the last couple of years where we saw a pretty mass exodus in our area, at least when it comes to healthcare workers just retiring or leaving the industry altogether. Marshfield, so we're in central Wisconsin. There's not a lot around us. We're within a couple hours of all the bigger areas within like Wisconsin. We're 3 hours from Minneapolis. We're 2 hours from you in Madison. We're 3 hours from Milwaukee. So we're close to everything, but we're not like there. And so we have experienced a lot where people who are retiring are also going, well, my kid's down in Green Bay. I'm actually moving over there to be closer to my grandkids. It's difficult then from our perspective to try to retain that membership when they're saying, well, I'm never coming back to the area. Like I don't have a tie here because everyone else is, geographically dispersed. So that's been a little bit of a challenge. So one of the things that we're looking to do is try to turn around our membership decline numbers and at least steady it. And then obviously we want to turn that into positive growth here in the future. So some of the initiatives that we are deploying here, we are optimistic are going to help us in that avenue. So it's, when people ask like, "Oh, I see you're growing," I have to kind of caveat it because it's like some of the metrics, yes, like we continue to grow our assets, and so that means that we're doing a better job of reaching our current members. But at the same time, through attrition, through unfortunately through passings, that kind of stuff, like we are still losing more members in one fashion than we are bringing in, and so that is a concern overall. I think for us, I'm sure that the larger institutions in our community would not necessarily agree with this, but I think for us, anyways, it's just a testament to the fact that we're just not a growing area from a community perspective, and so we are unique in some sense because we have the Marshfield Clinic, which is now a part of the Sanford Health Network based out of the Dakotas, but having a sizable health system here in a community that's only 20,000 people. So, you imagine that probably half the people in this community are somehow affiliated with that organization. It's a positive, but then it's also when that organization is struggling or has some challenges or aren't bringing new people in, then obviously that has a detrimental effect on the community as a whole. So looking to expand outside of the Marshfield area, try to build different relationships with some of our other healthcare-based organizations as well, because we're pretty fortunate being in the Midwest and specifically here in Wisconsin that we have access to pretty good healthcare networks. Like you guys have UW down by you, but we've got several of them throughout the state, depending on where you're at geographically. And so we've identified that there's a lot of potential there. We just need to get to a space where we are taking advantage of those, or at least building those relationships and having those conversations and going there. So that's again where, I look at that one metric and I'm like, yeah, it hasn't been good since I've started. But on the second hand, it's like, well, there are things that we can try before we need to take alternative routes, so to speak, for the future of our organization.
Yeah, I think the membership piece is probably the thing that most small credit unions struggle with, and credit unions in general. And my last sort of line of questioning for you will touch on some data that I've got that I'm going to be presenting next week at the Montana Credit Union Network's annual meeting, but also
Hmm.
that I'll be using during planning sessions.
Okay.
We really were trying to understand sort of consumer behavior and what leads someone to choose a different financial institution. So I'm going to bounce that data off you to see how you feel about it.
Yeah, please
But
do.
before we get to that, my second question for you, or my second line of questioning, is about the podcast.
Yeah.
So you've launched this podcast, and I think you've got about 10 episodes now. Um, maybe 8, 9, 10.
So our recording would have been episode 8 of it.
Oh, I'm right.
Yep.
Okay, so we've got 8 episodes.
Yep.
How is it going? And what's the reason that you started it? What are you hoping to do with it?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking about it. So I started this podcast last April, I think is when I actually launched it. So it's called See You at the Top. And the idea behind it was that, I mentioned at the beginning that my involvement with the Young Professionals Network really got me to a space where I felt prepared to be able to jump into some type of a leadership position, which is great. I was able to start when I was in my mid 20s, so I got 10 years basically under that umbrella. And so I was able to take advantage of that. But there's a window, especially, let's just face it, as the number of smaller credit unions go away, you're going to have some of these larger credit unions where you don't get the opportunity to be CEO at 30 or 35 even. And maybe even your jump into the leadership exploration, if you want to call it that. Maybe you're not even starting that conversation until you're 35 or 40 or whatnot. And so for a lot of these individuals and professionals within the space, there's this window where if you're not a young professional getting the exposure there, or you haven't already been groomed for, the last 10 years to take over a C-suite spot or whatever that looks like, you're just kind of stuck. And if your organization isn't helping you get to the training that you need or the exposure or the networking or whatever that looks like, it's really difficult to either build that mentorship relationship with someone who can coach you that way, or just get the exposure that you need to from a leadership perspective. And so what I wanted to do, or I'll back up one more step and just say that I've even had conversations with colleagues that I have gotten to know over the years through the YP network, and I'm 39 now, so we're all about the same age, and I say, hey, there's this opportunity at ABC Credit Union. I see, like, would you consider going for it? The response I get leads me to believe that the confidence level or the thought process of, well, yeah, I can do that, isn't there, because they'll disqualify themselves almost immediately. Oh, well, I don't have any experience to do that, or I don't think that they would hire me for A reason or B reason or whatever the case is. And the reality is that we have this disconnect within the industry where for some credit unions, they're struggling. The future outlook is not great. And maybe they just decide, okay, listen, it's just we just need to merge away. And I'm not going to say that every merger is a bad merger. I understand there's circumstances in which a merger is probably the most viable. But there are a number of instances that I've heard throughout the years and even recently, so this isn't like the phenomenon's going away, where a credit union just says, well, we just didn't have anyone in our ranks to take over. And I didn't want to, like, we didn't know anybody. And then I see this network of people who are there who I feel maybe they don't have the confidence to go after it, but I see the potential in them to be able to say, we just need to bridge that gap and bring these people together. So if the credit unions and the outgoing CEOs and the boards who maybe don't have the network and the relationships with some of these young professionals or emerging leaders, if they're not seeking them out, I want to instill in this next generation of leaders their confidence to say, hey, listen, I see there's a COO position over there. I have no idea who this credit union is, or I've never talked to the CEO. I'm going to go for it. Or if it is a CEO position, to go for it. Because then if at least it puts the onus back on the board. If they get an inflood of resumes and they say we don't like any of these, we're going to merge anyways, there's nothing that anyone could have done in that situation. But if they're seriously coming out and just saying, well, we just didn't have anyone who showed any interest in taking over the credit union, I want to make sure that we're exploring every single avenue before a credit union gets to that space and decides to merge away. And so, why I developed this podcast and why I wanted to have these conversations with leaders within our industry was really to demonstrate the idea that not all of us have our stuff together when we jump into these leadership roles. For some, I mentioned my first boss. There was unforeseen circumstances at her credit union where she got thrust into the role at like 26 or 27, and maybe there was conversation going into that maybe someday she would take over. I know that she wasn't thinking it was going to be at that age, and she learned how to do it. She had a great network of people in the area that helped her through the challenges that are come with being a CEO. But if you don't have that network around you, you don't have someone saying, I think you can do this, it's really hard to find that confidence in yourself, I think, at times. And so I want to bring people on the podcast who are willing to share their experience. And essentially, what I would like to cherry pick out of those conversations is to say, listen, I'm talking to, like I talked to you, and it's like, I didn't know I was going to jump into a leadership role at CUNA and ACU or whatnot, right? But the opportunities, and this is what happened, to get people to say, like, oh, well, I guess I don't have to have all my ducks in a row. I don't have to have everything figured out. I don't have to have 30 years of experience doing lending to be a CLO. I mean, you should probably know what a loan is. Yes, I get that. But it's like for a lot of these positions, it's like, do you have the passion? You talked a lot about having passion for your craft. Do you have the passion to lead a credit union? Do you have the passion for your members? Because if you have the passion, you will figure it out. You're going to figure out what
Mm.
needs to be done. And if you do fail, well, failure is a part of life. Like, but did you try? Did you do everything you could do to make sure that everything succeeded? And I just see that there's this group of people who I think would do really well, and they're just not getting lined up with the credit unions who are seeking those people. And so obviously we can't go around to every credit union who's got a outgoing CEO and make these connections, but hopefully we're just reaching the right people so that's like, okay, listen, we're going to keep as many small credit unions or mid-size even. I mean, it's not just the smaller ones, unfortunately, who are merging anymore. It seems like the larger ones are for whatever reason. But, any credit union that we can save because we were able to have someone walk into their shop with the confidence to say, listen, I want to give this a go. That's all we can ask for. Because I feel that, through networking and everything else, that the ones who have been doing it for a while, the ones like us, like me, who's only been doing it for a couple of years, like we will help you through this. We will take the time to work with you, so whether you meet someone at a league event and it's like, yeah, what here's my contact information. You reach out with anything, I will help you through this because I want your credit union to succeed as well. There's so many of us that are in the industry that are like that. And so I just want to give these people an opportunity and the confidence to go after these opportunities as opposed to thinking, well, I got to wait 20 years because I don't know what the industry is going to look like in 15 years or 10 years even. And so to think, oh, well, in 10 years, all these credit unions are going to be looking for CEOs and then I'll be ready. Well, they may not be. They may not be here anymore. I hope not. I hope that it is the same that it is today, but we know what the numbers are for the last couple of years and it's just not true. So that's the
Mm.
thought process behind it. Like I said, it's see you at the top. One of the challenges with the podcast is that I'm trying to record it in amongst my day-to-day stuff, and so I don't always have a consistent schedule with it. And as you mentioned, I'm only on episode 8 after a year, so it's like I know there's a lot of conversations that I'm missing out there, and a lot of great leaders that I need to reach out to and get on the podcast ultimately. But that's really the thought process and the goal behind it. I have no skin in the game. This is my way of giving back because I feel like there's so many who have given to me over the years and have helped me get me into this position, some of whom aren't even in the industry anymore, and it's really hard to give back to them specifically, but it's just passing that torch along to the next generation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad you're working on this issue. I mean, it's probably the most existential facing small credit unions is finding those successors. So many times back when I was working with CUNA, I'd have these credit unions reach out to me and say, I'm ready to retire. I live in this really tiny town in some rural place in Ohio. Can you help me find somebody? And I'd be like, well, I don't think so. I don't know. I don't know how to solve that problem.
Yeah.
I think we need some sort of, in addition to sort of raising awareness of the opportunity to connect young professionals with these opportunities. I think we need a broader strategy. Like someone needs to really sort of spearhead this problem because it could be one of the most impactful things that we do in order to help small credit unions is figure out this succession piece and this leadership piece. So I'm really glad that you're bringing light to this issue. So last couple minutes we have here, I have an 11 o'clock that
Oh,
I got
okay.
to
Yeah.
jump to, but
Yep.
I want to share the consumer research that I've been doing. I'll just share kind of the two big findings that I
Okay.
think are most fascinating to me, and I want to get your feedback, your thoughts on them. The first is, we tried to identify, sort of the Venn diagram of, primary financial institution user and products and services that they use at the credit union, or the bank. And the two products that are most predictive of primary use of a financial institution are, I mean, I guess I could ask you, see if I could quiz you on what those things are. Let's do that. I'll put you on the spot.
So I would guess checking account and mortgage.
Close, checking and direct deposit.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Um, and so that was really eye-opening. But I think also, helpful to really understand the, kind of some strategies that you could consider as far as increasing your primary users of your credit union. If you can get someone's direct deposit, and if you can get them to open a checking account. And, some other additional follow-on data around the checking is that people on average hold their primary checking account for 17 years.
Wow.
So that kind of shows you how difficult it can be to pull someone away from a long-term relationship.
Yep.
And also it shows you the importance of getting in early, and getting, that relationship when someone's young and just starting out, building their relationships with financial institutions. So that was really great, insight. The sort of not so great news is on market share, and for millennials and Gen Y and Gen Z, the big banks and the fintechs are kicking credit unions' butts in a big
Yeah.
way. Like 90% of the market share goes to big banks and into fintechs among the youngest cohorts, the people who were trying to be our core members into the future. And I think there's a lot of reasons for it. It's technology, it's accessibility through branches. And, those are probably kind of the biggest drivers of it as well. But just kind of wanted to get your feedback on some of that data in the last couple of minutes we have here before we sign off.
Yeah, I will say that our credit union struggles with the younger demographic as well. It's primarily that high school through college age. I think we're doing a decent job is that we've launched a rewards club account, kids rewards club account. Basically, it's a high yield savings account for anyone under the age of 18. It actually gives them rewards, little prizes if they actually physically come into the branch. So we're trying to teach them that, hey, we're here, we're a viable option. So parents are okay with that because they see the high yield and everything like that. And so I think we're doing an okay job there. That 19 to 25-year-old role, we are dropping the ball completely on that. And I think a lot of this, like you're saying, has to do with the idea that, Chime's a big one that's out there right now. People just use their Venmo accounts for keeping them, like they're acting like it's a checking account, especially when you couple it with their credit cards. So there's definitely a lot of unique challenges with how do we I don't necessarily, I mean, it is an awareness issue, and this is just like in general, that it's awareness issue of the industry, but it's also like, okay, well, even if they're aware that we're a credit union, we're here to serve them, if we don't have the product to compete with a Chime that's really easy and there's no fees and whatever else behind it, and that you can put your direct deposit into it, like we have to crack that nut. And I don't know. I wish I had the insight, a better insight as to how to do that. But I think that I know that we're not alone in that challenge. I know that there's a lot who are trying to figure out like, okay, how do we actually either come up with a partner, find a fintech to partner with, whatever it looks like, to be able to then offer an attractive product that can compete with these other fintechs that are putting all their resources into, you got a company like SoFi and it's like they're a fintech and then they spent $5 billion to sponsor or whatever they sponsored, SoFi Stadium. And it's like, we don't have the budget to be able to compete with that. So obviously, if they're putting that much money into advertising, what are they putting into their R&D and that kind of stuff? So like, just trying to figure out what that looks like, I think, is the going to be the $1 million question. I think for a lot of institutions, even the large ones, like the $1 million or the $1 billion credit unions, like if they can't figure that out, they're not going to be viable in 10 to 15 years either. So we got to figure out as an industry how to tackle that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what do they always say, right? Admitting that you have a problem is the first step towards solving it, right?
True.
So we definitely have a problem among younger groups, but I believe in the credit union industry to be resourceful, and I think that there are solutions. I mean, it kind of does go back to what we always say at Y Cup here, which is you gotta stand out in a specific way. You might not be able to compete with a SoFi or Chase or some of the big players in the industry in all ways, right? But you might be able to compete locally in a market that's being underserved or where there's an opportunity. And so being really strategic about finding those opportunities and trying to win in a very specific way in that specific space, that's kind of the first step, right? Like you got to figure out places where growth is truly possible, grow, and then what's the next step is keep making investments in your operations and your technology and your accessibility, your brand strategy, and slowly but surely you'll grow to the point where you can maybe start making inroads on some of these advantages that the other institutions have.
Yeah, for anyone listening, I think you hit it on the head. When you see a lot of these, even the large credit union mergers, and they talk about, well, we need scale and we need to be able to serve all these people and whatnot. And it's like I understand that strategy, but I think for a lot of credit unions, it is figure out your niche, do it better than anyone else, and you'll never have a problem with being an ongoing concern because you're going to meet the needs of your people, your members, your communities, and they're going to love you for it because they can't get it anywhere else, or you do it better than everyone else. And I think if you lean into that, I think you'll be fine, honestly. So good point.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, David, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Really appreciate this. Was so fun, trading podcasts here and
Yeah,
appearing on each other's
absolutely.
podcasts. So let's do it again soon. Good luck with everything up there, and I know we'll talk soon. Say hi to my buddy Derek when you see him.
I will. I will. He sent me a message today. He's actually out on his boat. So Derek, if you listen to this, you stinker.
Yeah, working hard as always. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But no, I appreciate the conversations today, Tom. It's been great. So thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, David. Appreciate it.